Imagine waiting 7 long years, only to return to a life that wasn't waiting for you. Welcome to Prime Tale, where every story is filled with drama, suspense, and emotions you'll never forget. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and join our journey. You won't want to miss a single moment. The prison gate. The metal gate groaned as it swung open, an almost mournful sound that echoed like a clock striking freedom. 7 years. 7 long, relentless years. Elias stepped forward, carrying only a small bag and a heart full of uncertainty. The sun hit his face like a stranger he didn't recognize, warmth both unfamiliar and cruel. Freedom didn't feel like freedom. It felt like an empty promise. He remembered her vividly, standing at the gate that day, hands trembling, eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I'll wait," she had whispered, voice shaking yet firm. Those words had been a lifeline in the darkness, a tether to the world outside. Every day in prison, those words played in his mind, keeping despair at bay. He had clung to them like a drowning man to driftwood. Outside the prison, Elias borrowed a phone from a guard he barely knew. His fingers shook as he dialed her number, memorized over countless nights of longing. It rang, and then silence. No voicemail, no explanation. Just a cruel emptiness that pressed heavier than the prison walls ever could. He sank onto a nearby bench, the city humming around him, yet he felt utterly alone. The streets were unfamiliar. Buildings had grown taller, shop signs had changed, and faces passed without recognition. Elias walked slowly, almost as if afraid to wake from a dream. Each step felt alien. Every corner reminded that life had moved forward without him. He was a ghost in a city that had forgotten his name. He found himself in front of the apartment he once called home. Same color, same structure, yet something felt profoundly wrong. The lock had changed. His knock echoed softly. No response. He knocked again, hope and dread warring inside him. Silence answered. A creak revealed a door opening next door. An older woman peeked out, eyes wide with curiosity that shifted quickly to shock. "You're back," she whispered. Elias nodded, voice caught somewhere between relief and despair. "You didn't know?" she asked, hesitation thick in the air. His stomach sank. "She left years ago," the woman said softly, almost afraid to speak the truth. "She's married now." Elias felt the words pierce deeper than any sentence could. His mind raced, trying to process the betrayal and the absence, the years he had waited, the letters unanswered, the promises broken. His chest ached as if the walls of the apartment had reached inside him. That night, Elias found himself on a bench in the city park, shivering slightly in the cold air. Free yet homeless, free yet abandoned. Freedom had never felt so bitter. He stared at the stars, feeling the weight of 7 years, the emptiness of hope deferred. Tears pricked the corners of his eyes, but he swallowed them down. Tomorrow, he told himself, tomorrow he would start somehow, even if the world had moved on without him. As the city lights flickered in the distance, Elias remembered fragments of the life he once had, her laughter echoing in empty hallways, the smell of coffee in their shared kitchen, the simple touch of her hand. The memories were both a comfort and a torment. He understood in that quiet night that the world had changed, and so had he. And yet, a spark deep inside whispered that perhaps, even in this pain, he could find a way forward. Elias closed his eyes and let the memory flood back, sharper and more vivid than he expected. 7 years ago, the world had felt simpler, yet every moment carried the weight of promises and dreams. She had stood there at the prison gate, trembling hands, red-rimmed eyes, but with determination that cut through the cold morning air. "I'll wait," she had whispered, voice fragile but resolute. Those words had been his lifeline, a thread connecting him to hope when the walls around him seemed endless. Every day, Every night in prison, he replayed those words in his mind. They were a mantra that kept despair from swallowing him whole. He remembered the small details vividly, the way her hair caught the sunlight, the way her fingers fidgeted with the strap of her bag, the slight quiver in her lips. He remembered the scent of the flowers she had brought the day he arrived, how it mixed with the crisp morning air, the way she had smiled at him, bravely holding back tears, as if she knew that her courage was the only thing keeping him alive. Those images became a sanctuary in his mind. Whenever a guard walked past too close, whenever nights felt impossibly long, he could close his eyes and see her, hear her voice, and feel the warmth of being remembered, of being loved, even from a distance. Time had stretched and contracted in prison, each day dragging while the years passed all the same. Yet her promise anchored him, gave him a reason to endure the monotony, the fear, the relentless isolation. He would often imagine their future together in vivid detail, painting pictures in his mind of their reunion, their laughter, their life beyond the gates. He clung to the hope that someday this imagined future would become reality. He remembered the letters he had written, pouring out his heart, detailing every fear, every fleeting joy he found within the walls of his cell. Each one was an attempt to reach her, to remind her of his presence and of his unwavering hope. He had rewritten them countless times, sometimes with trembling hands, sometimes with tears streaking the paper, never knowing if they would be read. Every envelope, every carefully chosen word, had carried the weight of 7 years' worth of longing. He felt the sharp contrast, now the reality outside the gate, and the memory was both a comfort and a knife. That morning, that promise had felt like the most sacred truth, a tether to the world he longed to rejoin. And now, standing in the free air, he wondered if any of it had been real, or if it had only existed in the fragile corners of a 7-year-old memory. The memory stretched on in his mind, each detail amplified, leaving him both grateful for the solace it had given and aching for the reality that had shattered it. Elias stopped walking. The street noise faded into the background as his fingers tightened around the small piece of paper in his pocket. The phone number written there was worn and creased, folded and unfolded so many times over 7 years that it felt like cloth instead of paper. This number had kept him alive in prison. It had been his promise that everything he was enduring had a purpose. Now, it was time to test that promise. He stepped into a small roadside kiosk and asked to borrow a phone. The shop owner barely looked at him, sliding an old phone across the counter. The screen was cracked, the edges chipped, as if it had survived many falls just like him. Elias stared at the phone. His thumb hovered over the keypad, shaking slightly. 7 years ago, calling her had been effortless. Back then, he never feared her voice. Now, he feared the silence more than anything else. He took a deep breath and dialed the first digit, then the second. With every number, his chest tightened. His heart pounded harder than it ever had in prison fights or interrogation rooms. Those moments had been physical. This was emotional, and it terrified him. He pressed the call button. The phone rang. Once. Twice. Each ring felt like a countdown to something irreversible. He imagined her answering, surprised, whispering his name as if afraid it wasn't real. He imagined her crying, asking where he was, telling him she had waited. The ringing stopped. Voicemail. His throat tightened. "It's okay," he whispered to himself. She didn't hear it. He tried again immediately. This time, it rang longer. 3 rings. 4. Then silence. A cold, mechanical voice replaced the hope in his chest. "The number you are trying to reach is currently unavailable." Elias stared at the screen. Unavailable. Not busy. Not missed. Unavailable. His mind raced to protect him from the truth. Maybe her phone was dead. Maybe she had changed networks. Maybe she was at work. He clung to every excuse like a drowning man grabbing air. He dialed again, and again. Each failed attempt chipped away at something inside him. On the fifth call, the line connected just for a moment. He heard music, laughter, voices in the background that didn't belong to her. Then the call ended. Elias's knees weakened. He stepped back and leaned against the wall, the phone slipping slightly in his hand. His chest felt hollow, as if something had been removed without warning. 7 years. 7 years of letters that went unanswered. 7 years of dreams that ended with her face. 7 years of believing love could wait. And now this. People walked past him, brushing his shoulders, laughing, arguing, living. No one noticed a man standing still while his entire future quietly collapsed. In prison, rejection had been slow. It came in letters that never arrived, visits that never happened. Out here, rejection was instant and merciless. Elias handed the phone back to the shop owner without speaking. As he walked away, a terrifying thought settled deep in his chest. What if she hadn't just moved phones? What if she had moved on? And what if the life he had survived 7 years for no longer had space for him? Elias stood at the edge of the street where he used to live, his feet planted firmly on the ground, but his heart unsure whether it belonged there anymore. The buildings were still standing, the road still cracked in the same places, but everything felt shifted, like a photograph that had been slightly tilted without anyone noticing. The old grocery store had a new sign. The barber shop where he once joked with friends now played loud music he didn't recognize. Even the air felt different, thicker, less forgiving. He took a slow step forward, then another. With each movement, memories collided with reality. This was where he used to walk hand in hand with her on quiet evenings, planning a future that felt unbreakable. Now, people passed him without a glance. No recognition, no warmth. He was a ghost walking through a life that had learned how to function without him. When Elias reached the house, his chest tightened. The paint was new. The gate had been replaced. Even the flowers in front were different, carefully arranged, unfamiliar. He stood there for a long moment, afraid to knock, afraid of what would answer. Finally, he raised his hand. The door opened. A woman he barely recognized stared back at him, her eyes scanning his face with confusion, then something colder distance. She was older now, stronger, maybe, but not the woman he remembered. "Yes," she asked. Elias swallowed. "It's me." Silence fell between them like a wall. In that moment, he understood something painful. Time hadn't just passed, it had chosen sides. And it hadn't chosen him. She didn't invite him in. Instead, she stepped outside and gently closed the door behind her, as if protecting what was inside from him. Her words were careful but sharp. "You shouldn't have come like this," she said. Elias felt the weight of those words press into his chest. He asked questions he wasn't ready to hear answers to. And slowly, too slowly, she told him the truth. About the years she waited. About how waiting turned into surviving. About how surviving eventually turned into moving on. "There was no room for you anymore," she said quietly. Those words hurt more than the prison bars ever did. A man stepped out, confident, comfortable. His hand rested naturally on her shoulder. Elias felt his world fracture. The man looked at Elias not with hatred, but with curiosity, the kind reserved for problems already solved. "This is my partner," she said. Partner. The word echoed endlessly in Elias's mind. 7 years erased by a single sentence. Neighbors watched from windows. Whispers spread quietly but quickly. Elias could feel their eyes on him, judging, measuring, dismissing. He had survived prison, but this moment stripped him bare. He nodded slowly, stepping back, giving them space he never wanted to give. His legs felt heavy, but he forced himself to walk away with dignity. Inside, he was breaking. That night, Elias sat alone on a bench under a flickering streetlight. The city buzzed around him, alive and indifferent. He replayed every moment of the encounter, every word spoken and unspoken. He wondered if loving someone for 7 years was foolish or brave. He wondered if freedom had arrived too late to matter. As the night deepened, Elias faced a quiet but powerful choice: disappear completely, or rebuild from nothing. He had lost his past, but the future still waited, uncertain and fragile. He stood up slowly. For the first time since his release, he didn't look back. Elias walks into the darkness carrying a new truth. Freedom doesn't guarantee belonging, and love doesn't always survive time. But pain has a way of forging something stronger if you let it. And somewhere deep inside him, a new story begins. Rain came without mercy. Elias woke up on a narrow bench at a bus stop, his back stiff, his head heavy. The city stretched awake around him, engines starting, vendors shouting, people rushing toward lives that had meaning and structure. He sat up slowly, rubbing his face, tried to remember when freedom was supposed to feel like relief. His stomach growled. His clothes smelled like the street, and the truth settled in quietly but firmly. He had nowhere to go. Prison had given him routine, even if it had stolen everything else. Out here, there was no bell, no schedule, no one telling him where to stand or what to do. Just choices, too many of them, and the terrifying responsibility of surviving on his own. Tools, joke loudly, sweat freely. Work, honest work, something solid. He approached the supervisor and asked if they needed help. The man looked him up and down, skeptical but not unkind. Any experience? Yes, Elias replied quickly. I learned fast. The supervisor nodded, then asked the question Elias feared most. Where have you been the last 7 years? The silence that followed was brutal. Elias told the truth. The man's expression changed, not angry, just closed. We'll call you, he said, already turning away. They never would. By afternoon, hunger sharpened Elias's thoughts. Prison had taught him how desperation worked, how quickly dignity could erode when survival was on the line. He passed a food stall and counted the coins in his pocket. Not enough. For the first time since his release, a dark thought crossed his mind. It would be easy. He clenched his fists. 7 years had taken enough from him. He would not let it take his future, too. Instead, he walked away, even as his stomach protested. By afternoon, hunger sharpened Elias's thoughts. Prison had taught him how desperation worked, how quickly dignity could erode when survival was on the line. He passed a food stall and counted the coins in his pocket. Not enough. For the first time since his release, a dark thought crossed his mind. It would be easy. He clenched his fists. 7 years had taken enough from him. He would not let it take his future, too. Instead, he walked away, even as his stomach protested. Near evening, Elias heard his name. He turned. A man stood across the street, older, heavier, but unmistakably familiar. Jonah, an old friend, someone who used to sit beside him at football matches, who had promised a visit but never did. Elias, Jonah asked cautiously. They stared at each other, both unsure whether the past was welcome. Jonah broke the silence first. I heard you were out. Elias nodded. I heard nothing. The words weren't angry, just honest. Jonah offered him a meal. Elias hesitated, then accepted. They ate in silence at first, the weight of old memories hovering between them. I can help you, Jonah finally said, but people will talk. You know how this place is. Elias understood. Help always came with a price: pride, privacy, or both. Still, he nodded. I don't have many options. That night, Elias lay on a mattress on Jonah's floor. It wasn't comfortable, but it was inside, safe. quiet. As he stared at the ceiling, his thoughts returned to her, to the way she had looked at him not with hatred, but with finality that hurt more. Before sleep took him, Elias made a silent promise. He would not beg, he would not steal, and he would not disappear. If the world had erased him once, it would have to try harder. Elias woke before dawn, the city still asleep. The chill in the air reminded him of the prison mornings. But now it was different. He was free to move, to act, to create. He signed up for a vocational course at a local center, learning skills that had been impossible to pursue behind bars. Every hammer strike, every brushstroke, every instruction he followed felt like a reclaiming of his stolen time. It was painful, exhausting, and yet invigorating. Each small accomplishment whispered that he was not defined by his past. At the construction site, he was initially treated with suspicion. Foremen eyed him warily. Co-workers barely spoke. But Elias was consistent, punctual, and thorough. Slowly, respect began to replace distrust. Small gestures, a nod, a compliment on a job, well done, built his confidence. With each day, he felt the fragile threads of self-worth knitting back together. One afternoon, a supervisor approached him. "We've got a project that needs extra hands. You interested?" The assignment came with responsibility, but also the risk of failure. Elias nodded. This was a chance to prove not just to others, but to himself, that he could handle the world outside prison walls. Every step he took on the scaffold, every calculation, every decision, reminded him that he was capable. Elias often thought of Maya during these long days. Anger had once consumed him, but as he worked, it softened into a quiet reflection. Forgiveness was not about forgetting. It was about reclaiming peace. He realized he could not control her choices, nor should he let them dictate his future. Each forgiving thought felt like a small liberation. The nights were hardest. Memories surfaced unbidden her smile, the letters, the absence, the betrayal. But now, instead of letting anger fester, he wrote in his journal. He poured every emotion onto the pages, then closed it and breathed deeply. Anger had been a prison within a prison. Letting it go was terrifying, yet healing. Freedom no longer felt like a destination, but a series of small victories. Finishing a job, helping a coworker, saving a few coins, sleeping without fear. Elias began to understand that freedom was not about returning to a life paused. It was about building one he could live in fully, without regrets or illusions. Elias dreamed not of the past, but of the future. He imagined a small apartment of his own, friends who trusted him, a life that could hold love without expectation. His ambitions were modest but meaningful. Each dream was a step forward. Each plan a declaration that he would no longer be defined by years lost. Weeks turned into months. Every challenge, every rejection, every moment of doubt became a lesson in endurance. Elias discovered resilience within himself that he had never imagined. He could survive loss, heartbreak, and abandonment, yet emerge stronger. The city that had once seemed hostile now became a canvas for his new life. One evening, he sat on a rooftop, gazing at the twinkling lights below. The world had moved on without him, but he had caught up in his own way, on his own terms. The past no longer held chains around his wrists. He understood now that survival was more than living, it was building, learning, forgiving, and daring to hope again. Elias entered the local workshop early in the morning. A new supervisor, Sarah, had been assigned to oversee his project. She was perceptive, sharp, and unafraid to challenge him. At first, Elias' approach cautiously trust had always been fragile. But Sarah recognized his dedication and quietly encouraged him, becoming the first person outside of family who seemed to believe in his potential. Each word of acknowledgement strengthened his resolve. While working, Elias overheard co-workers whispering about his past. Prison, someone muttered, glancing at him with skepticism. A chill ran down his spine. The past, which he had tried to leave behind, was never far away. These whispers reminded him that the world outside still viewed him as a convict before a man. He took a deep breath and focused on his work, letting the sound of machines drown out judgment. Sarah assigned him a complex project, one that required precision, patience, and problem-solving. For hours, Elias worked under her watchful eye. Every mistake felt magnified, every success quietly celebrated. It was a test of his patience and skill, but also of his ability to trust and grow in a new environment. Each completed task built confidence, reminding him that he was more than his past. Late that evening, Elias passed the same street where he had first seen Maya. The memories hit like a tidal wave. Her smile, her voice, the life she had built without him. His chest tightened. He realized that moving forward didn't erase the past. It simply required walking with it. He whispered to himself, "I can survive this, too." One night, a co-worker challenged him, mocking his history. Elias could feel anger rising, but instead of lashing out, he maintained composure. Every word he chose was deliberate. His silence spoke louder than any retort. This confrontation became a quiet victory, showing that the man he was becoming could endure and respond with dignity. Elias successfully completed the most difficult project assigned to him. Sarah nodded with approval, a rare smile lighting her face. The pride he felt was not just in the work itself, but in the acknowledgement that he had reclaimed some control over his life. Each victory, no matter how small, became a brick in the foundation of his new identity. While walking home one evening, Elias saw a familiar face, one of Maya's friends, someone who knew both of their stories. The brief conversation was awkward, full of half-smiles and veiled glances, but it reminded him that the world still connected in strange ways, and that his journey wasn't entirely isolated. The past could appear unexpectedly, but he had the strength to face it. That night, Elias sat on the rooftop, overlooking the city. He reflected on the challenges of the week, the victories, the confrontations, and the allies he had found. He felt the weight of the past, but it no longer crushed him. Instead, it shaped him, sharpened him, and prepared him for the days ahead. He realized that survival was not just endurance, it was growth, learning, and courage. Elias went to sleep with a quiet determination. The city was still full of judgment and whispers, but he had begun to find a rhythm within it. He had survived the past, begun building a future, and learned that every day offered a choice to stumble or to rise. And he chose to rise. Elias arrived at the workshop early, as always. Today, however, a large and complex project awaited him, one that could make or break his reputation with the team. The plans were complicated, and the deadline was tight. His heart raced with a mixture of excitement and fear. This was not just a test of skill. It was a test of everything he had learned about perseverance, patience, and focus since leaving prison. The pressure intensified as co-workers watched every move. Small mistakes felt magnified. The machines groaned and clanked, echoing his inner tension. Each step forward required careful calculation. The past whispered in the back of his mind. Failure meant judgment, rejection, and the looming shadow of being defined by years behind bars. Elias clenched his jaw and pressed on. Chapter 3. Ghosts of Yesterday. While working, Elias caught sight of a familiar figure across the street, Maya, walking briskly with her husband. His chest tightened, memories of pain and longing rushing back. For a moment, he faltered, but then he reminded himself of the life he was building. The past would appear, but he could still choose how to respond. He exhaled, focusing back on the task at hand. Sarah noticed his distraction and approached him. "Focus on what you can control," she said quietly. Her words were simple, but they carried weight. Elias nodded, absorbing the advice, allowing it to guide him. He realized that while he could not change the past or control others' perceptions, he could master his own actions and responses. Halfway through the project, a critical error was discovered. Elias's heart sank. For a moment, the room seemed to shrink around him. Colleagues whispered, deadlines loomed, and the weight of potential failure pressed heavily. But Elias did not panic. He took a deep breath, analyzed the problem, and began to correct it methodically. This was a turning point. Failure was not the end, but a lesson in resilience. Hours passed, each moment stretching like an eternity. Elias worked tirelessly, correcting the mistake with precision. Sweat ran down his face, muscles ached, but he persisted. With each completed task, the respect of his peers grew. By the end of the day, the project was back on track. He realized that redemption was earned not through words, but through consistent, determined action. As Elias left the workshop, he ran into Maya again, this time alone. Their eyes met briefly, and an unspoken acknowledgement passed between them. Neither spoke. The tension was thick, layered with years of unspoken feelings, regrets, and what-ifs. It was a fleeting encounter, but it reminded Elias that the past would always intersect with his present. How he chose to respond would define the next chapter of his life. That night, Elias sat in his small apartment, exhausted but satisfied. He reflected on the day, the challenges, the mistakes, the victories, and the encounters with his past. He realized that life would always present storms, both internal and external, but he had learned to face them, to persevere, and to emerge stronger. He understood that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. Elias went to bed with a renewed sense of purpose. The coming days would test him even more, and the shadows of the past were never far away. But he felt ready, stronger, and wiser than before. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for the first time in a long while, he felt truly capable of facing them. His journey was far from over, but he had proven that he could endure and grow, and that was a victory in itself. Elias sat in his apartment, reviewing plans for a new project at work. His phone rang unexpectedly. The name on the screen made his heart skip a beat. It was Maya. Hesitation froze his hand as he answered, his voice measured but calm. The call was brief, an invitation to meet and talk finally face to face. Elias felt a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. This was the moment that had been building for 7 years. They agreed to meet at a quiet cafe in the city, one far from the streets they once knew. Elias arrived early, nerves coiling in his stomach. He watched as people passed by, unaware that a lifetime of tension and heartbreak was about to collide in one room. When Maya entered, he could see the same recognition and fear mirrored in her eyes. Time seemed suspended. Everything else faded. They sat across from each other. Silence lingered for a moment, filled with years of longing, regret, and what-ifs. Elias finally spoke, carefully choosing words that reflected both pain and understanding. Maya responded with honesty, recounting her struggles, her choices, and the guilt she carried. Every word was heavy, each pause deliberate. They realized that 7 years apart had changed them both, yet some emotions remained stubbornly intact. Midway through their conversation, the door opened, and her husband entered the cafe. The tension spiked instantly. Elias felt a sharp awareness of the boundaries he could not cross. Maya's posture shifted. Her voice faltered. The room seemed to shrink as the three of them shared the same space, a collision of past and present. Every glance, every subtle movement carried unspoken meaning. Elias maintained composure, aware that anger or impulsiveness would undo the progress he had made over the years. Maya explained, subtly and carefully, her perspective to her husband. Every word was chosen to protect the truth while preserving dignity. Elias listened, internalizing the conversation, noting the complexities of love, loyalty, and circumstance. It was a lesson in restraint and understanding. After a long, tense dialogue, Elias realized that some closure did not come from dramatic confrontation or confessions. Instead, it came from the shared acknowledgement of the past and the conscious decision to move forward. The three of them left the cafe, each carrying the weight of truth, but also the relief of honesty. Elias felt a strange calm. The storm of emotions that had plagued him was finally settling. Elias returned to his apartment as the sun dipped below the horizon. He reflected on the journey, the prison, the lost love, the hardships, and the victories. He understood now that freedom was not just about being released from physical chains, but about reclaiming one's heart and mind. He had faced the ghosts of the past and survived. In the weeks that followed, Elias threw himself into his projects, relationships, and self-growth. Every action was infused with the wisdom he had earned through pain and perseverance. He discovered that life's richness came from embracing both joy and sorrow, courage and fear. He was no longer a man defined by absence or betrayal, but by resilience, choice, and hope. One quiet night, Elias sat on the rooftop, gazing at the city lights. Memories of Maya and the journey they had shared flickered in his mind. But now, they were memories tempered with understanding, not chains. He whispered to the night, "I am free, not just from prison, but from the past that once held him captive." The journey was complete not with a reunion, but with a profound realization that survival, growth, and self-respect were victories in themselves. Elias had hoped that staying clean and walking away from Marcus would be enough. But the city had other plans. Rumors spread like wildfire. Neighbors whispered. Shopkeepers exchanged glances. And even Jonah avoided questions he couldn't answer. In a world that already doubted him, reputation was everything, and Elias's was crumbling. One afternoon, 2 officers came knocking. Official, polite, but their eyes carried suspicion. They asked about his past, his connections, his recent movements. Each question cut deeper than any prison interrogation had. Elias answered carefully, revealing nothing that could incriminate him but enough to keep the officers watching. Meanwhile, Marcus's presence loomed larger. Small threats, veiled warnings, and appearances in places Elias least expected. He realized that leaving the old life didn't make him free, it made him a target. Marcus had built a network that could reach him wherever he went. Jonah tried to help, but even he admitted that Elias needed to be smarter, faster, and stronger than before. The first real test came when Marcus approached with an ultimatum. Cash, favors, or exposure. The city that had once ignored him now offered no refuge. Elias found a surprising ally. A former acquaintance, someone he had never expected to trust again, offered support. Not charity, but strategy, a plan to navigate Marcus's manipulation and the city's watchful eyes. Elias walked the streets at night, observing, learning, and remembering lessons from his past. The city had rules, unspoken and sharp. Every corner had a story. Every alley had a consequence. He studied patterns, noticed weaknesses, and slowly began to regain confidence in his own ability to survive. Marcus attempted to corner him again, a calculated move designed to trap him emotionally and financially. Elias avoided the confrontation, using his newfound awareness to remain unseen. Each near encounter strengthened his resolve. He would not be manipulated again. By the end of episode 10, Elias understood that survival was no longer about avoiding mistakes. It was about taking control. He began forming a plan not just to protect himself, but to outmaneuver Marcus. The world was pushing back, but he was learning to push forward quietly and decisively. As night fell, Elias stood on a rooftop, looking at the city that had nearly swallowed him whole. He felt the weight of every choice, every consequence, but instead of despair, there was focus. The fight wasn't over, it had just evolved. And for the first time, he felt like he could win, aware that every step now carries risks. The city's eyes are on him. Marcus is scheming, and survival depends not on chance, but on cunning, courage, and patience. Tomorrow, the real test begins. Elias realized that staying in the city would only bring more danger. Every street, every corner, every familiar face carried risk, packing only the essentials. He left behind the life he had tried to rebuild. The city's skyline faded as he traveled, replaced by open roads and unknown horizons. He felt a strange mix of fear and liberation for the first time. Elias was truly alone. The solitude was heavy. Nights were the hardest, no familiar sounds, no friends, no one to share a word with. But in that silence, he began to hear himself again. His thoughts, his fears, his regrets all coming into focus. He understood that rebirth required reflection. In a small town, he met an older man who had once walked a similar path. This stranger offered no pity, only advice and stories. He taught Elias the value of patience, observation, and self-discipline. Elias absorbed every word, seeing in this man the kind of mentor he never had in his past. Elias found work in a modest workshop. Each day was physically exhausting, mentally challenging, but honest. Sweat and fatigue replaced fear and shame. For the first time, he experienced pride in something he had earned with his own hands. Rebuilding wasn't easy, but he learned humility, patience, and perseverance. In quiet moments, Elias revisited the pain of the past 7 years. He acknowledged the hurt caused by love loss, betrayals, and false hopes. But instead of letting them control him, he used them to grow. Every memory became a lesson. Every scar, a reminder of survival and resilience. He cautiously made friends in the town, people who didn't know his past. Bonds formed slowly, built on trust and shared work. These connections taught him the importance of loyalty, honesty, and choosing the right people to share life with. He learned that true companionship required patience and discernment. Months passed, and Elias grew stronger not just physically, but mentally. He walked taller, spoke with authority, and approached challenges with calm. Confidence was no longer forced. It came naturally from proving to himself that he could survive, adapt, and thrive. Marcus found a way to reach him even here, offering an opportunity that would test his resolve. Elias considered it, felt the old temptation, but this time he acted with clarity and caution. He refused, firmly and strategically, ensuring that his rebirth wouldn't be undone by the shadows of the past. The residual fear that had haunted him. By facing the city, Marcus, and his own inner doubts from a distance, he realized that fear was only powerful if he let it control his choices. Mastery over fear became a tool, not a curse. The man who left the city was not the same man returning. Stronger, wiser, more grounded, he prepares for the final confrontation not with rage or revenge, but with purpose. The world may push back, but Elias is ready. Elias returned to the city not to reclaim anything, but to face the final pieces of his journey. Streets that once felt suffocating now seemed smaller, quieter, manageable. He walked deliberately, observing every corner, every shadow, aware of the forces that had once controlled him. Marcus awaited him in a secluded location, confident, calculating. Elias approached calmly, the man who had once tempted and threatened him now seeing someone he could not manipulate. Words were exchanged, tension thick as steel. Marcus realized that the fear he had once wielded as a weapon no longer existed. Elias spoke with quiet authority, offering Marcus a choice. Not threats, not revenge, just a truth that continued oppression would have consequences. The encounter ended without violence, proving that control and freedom were choices, not fights. He sought out the woman who had haunted his past. They met again, not as lovers, not as enemies, but as two people who had shaped each other's lives in ways that could not be erased. Words were exchanged, apologies spoken, and closure achieved. Neither claimed ownership of the other. Respect and honesty replaced longing and regret. Elias reached out to those who had stood by him, those who had helped in small ways, repairing bonds and offering gratitude. The past still existed, but it no longer dictated his present. He faced rumors, past friends, and old debts with integrity, never compromising the man he had become. He found a place to live that he could call home, a small apartment filled with light, a kitchen he could cook in, a space where he could think, plan, and breathe. Work became routine but satisfying. Relationships were cautious, built on trust and honesty, not desperation. Elias spent evenings reflecting, writing, and walking the streets without fear. Memories still came, but they no longer carried weight. He realized that freedom was more than absence of bars. It was mastery over one's mind, one's choices, and one's emotions. Those who had doubted him began to see the change. He was respected not for wealth or power, but for resilience, intelligence, and integrity. Marcus's attempts to manipulate or intimidate were now irrelevant. Elias had become a man defined by his actions, not by the past. The city, once an antagonist, became a backdrop for growth. The dangers remained, but Elias had learned to navigate them without losing himself. He understood that survival wasn't enough. Living fully required courage, wisdom, and patience. Walking through the city streets at dawn, sunlight reflecting on buildings, the air fresh and new. He had survived prison, betrayal, temptation, and danger. Now he chose life, freedom, and himself every day. The final words echo silently. Freedom isn't given its claim moment by moment, choice by choice. Thank you so much for watching this story till the very end. Your time and support mean the world to me and help us keep bringing amazing stories to life. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an exciting story from Prime Tale. We have more thrilling story coming your way, and I can't wait to share them with you. See you in the next video.